Well, good morning. I hope your Sunday is off to a good start. Last week we started a two-part report focusing on one of the key legislative races in Upper Michigan. We'll continue that discussion today, and the conversation starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, that key legislative race is in the 38th Senate District, where Senator Tom Casperson is term limited. Come November, current State Representative Scott Dianda will be the Democratic candidate, but the Republican challenger will be chosen in the August primary. Vying for that nomination are businessman Mike Carey and former State Representative Ed McBroom. So that you can get to know both of those candidates, we invited them to appear here separately. Last week we heard from Mike Carey. This morning our guest is Ed McBroom. Ed, welcome back to the Ryan Report.
Thanks very much, Don. Glad to be here.
We're going to talk about some things maybe we've talked about before, but this is really a chance for people to get to know kind of who you are and what you're about and what you think the important issues are. You were born on a dairy farm, right?
Yeah, born and raised and still there.
Still there, still milking those cows.
We used to do about 45 when I was real little, and now we're doing about 135.
Okay, you're a graduate of Norway High School?
That's right.
And you went to NMU?
Yep, graduate degrees in music education and social studies secondary education.
And at one point, I think in a previous conversation, I learned you were kind of thinking that teaching and farming would be kind of a good combination.
That was the direction I was headed in, and of course that meant the teaching had to stay somewhat close to the farming.
Right.
So I did a lot of substitute teaching for a number of years, waiting for positions to open up, and then I got involved with Michigan Farm Bureau, and that got me involved then with some politics, and next thing you know, Tom Casperson asked me if I'd run for State House, and got into politics, and that's where I've been, farming and politics instead of farming and teaching.
So you really hadn't thought much about getting into politics before that involvement?
It was one of those, crazy kid dreams. Play for the Tigers, run for Congress, and the Tigers one went away after I was too old, and Congress was like, well, I'm still too young. So
yeah. You're married. You have
5 children.
5 children.
Yeah, 11 to 1.
Okay. Tell us more about the farm.
Well, it's 101 years old. It was purchased by my great-grandfather in 1917, and started with about 13 cows milking by hand and a couple of 40s, and now we're at about 340 acres and milking 130 cows, have about 300 head altogether. Farm with my parents, my brother and his wife. They have 7 children, and then with my wife and our 5, and it's amazing. We're very, very blessed. We're very blessed to get to work together and raise our children there on the farm. It's a special thing. It's hard work, but it's special.
And you also raise, I think, some of the feed for the cows as well, right?
That's right. On the acreage where we grow corn, wheat, and hay.
Okay. And I know you're active in your church. You're also have been the conductor of the Norway City Band, I believe.
Yeah, I still love music and take the opportunities both at church, and I've been the director now of the Norway City Band, I think, for 4 years. It's our 137th season this year, and I enjoy going around and recruiting some of the area high school talent along with adults, and we've had a really good band the last couple of years and playing some new music along with much of our standard fare as well.
Do you get out in March on the 4th of July?
Absolutely.
Where will you be?
The Norway Parade, the city band will be there. Of course, I'll be doing political parades. Right. Otherwise, most likely, Marquette, Gladstone, Houghton, Bessemer.
Right.
And then hopefully the Norway City Band, hopefully we can put our numbers together and be available for some other parades over the summer that we get invites to.
Okay. Well, let's talk about you and the fact that you're running for this state Senate seat. And again, this is an open seat. State Senator Tom Casperson is term limited. The fact that you served in the State House of Representatives, does that give you an even greater desire to get back into this race?
In a lot of respects, it does. I think it's really critical to have a senator who's ready to hit the ground running, who knows where the bathrooms are, as we often joke around about the folks who are new and don't know where they are yet. Right. Representing almost the entire UP and usually being the only UPer in the state Senate is a really critical position and somebody there with experience and know-how. And I think on top of that experience and know-how, there's a lot of things that I worked on while I was in the House that ran out of time, some significant government reforms, especially some areas on education and curriculum that we made some changes, but I believe aren't enough, and we need more local control for our schools. Some reforms for ethics and procedure that I worked on, but got through the House but couldn't get through the Senate. And also I think that Tom Casperson has been a phenomenal senator with a great deal of accomplishment for us, but we risk losing that legacy depending on who follows and who's going to continue with the programs and the tenacity that Tom shared with people in Lansing about the UP. And I want to be able to carry that legacy that Tom's left for us on and make sure that we really protect a lot of that legislation that he worked so hard on and I worked with him so hard on, and make sure that the UP continues to take advantage of those good policies and the developments that are coming because of that.
Are there other key issues as far as you're concerned in this campaign?
Well, auto insurance is one that was always important to me while I was in the House, and you saw this year it got further than it's gotten in over 30 years with finally at least getting an up or down vote in the House. We need significant relief for auto insurance. It's out of control. It's especially hard on lower income individuals who buy cars, pay high insurance, and then when the car hits a deer or something, they get nothing for all that money they spent on insurance. So we really need auto insurance reform. And when you're talking, there was a bill, the one that was voted on, mandated at least 40% savings on average for a lot of citizens. Senior citizens would have saved even more because they could have gotten out of buying the personal injury protection. That's a huge amount of savings when you're talking about auto insurance that averages between $1,700 and $2,000 a year per vehicle. So I'm really passionate about getting that done and partnering up with others who've worked on that, and hopefully some of the members who wouldn't give a yes vote aren't going to be there anymore from both sides of the aisle. Other issues that remain important to me, land management, natural resources, those were certainly areas that Tom and I worked on very hard together that I want to continue to work hard on. We need to have a lot more ability up here in the UP to take that local control of the decisions with land management. We need the tax base back for our communities, and we need to continue to promote a lot of the base industries that are the support of the economy here in the UP and are really driving some of the renaissance that you see all over the Upper Peninsula.
We'll get back and talk about more of those issues in
Okay.
detail in just a couple of minutes. I'll be back with more on today's show after we take this 2-minute break. We're talking this morning with former State Representative Ed McBroom. Ed is one of 2 Republican candidates for the 38th State Senate seat. And let's talk about some of these issues we were kind of introduced earlier. Jobs and the environment are important to everybody.
Yeah.
People want the environment protected. They still want family-sustaining jobs.
Yeah.
Are those 2 things compatible?
I believe they are, absolutely. I think you're seeing a lot of that take place now across the Upper Peninsula. The timber industry continues on, the paper industry, and you see the mining coming back, not only with the iron mining, but also with the Eagle project. Now the Back 40 project is going to be getting started, hopefully Highland Copper. These are real opportunities to strengthen our base economy and also continue to have all the things that come along with that. So I think it's evidence all around us that we can, because despite the fact those things are there, we still talk about living in just one of the most beautiful places in the country. And if you think about our history in the Upper Peninsula and how mining and forestry were done 100 years ago compared to today, I mean, it was just, there wasn't really a lot of rules or order that were followed. They put roads wherever they wanted to, dug holes wherever they wanted to, and now all of a sudden it's very structured and very regulated, and we see that we can take care of this environment and still live here and enjoy a beautiful place. And I think it's really important that we do that, that we don't create a system that says, well, we can't do any of these things anymore. We can use modern technology, we can use modern science, and we can also count on, I think, a really robust public discussion about it. The fact that people care about it and spend their time monitoring and keeping an eye on things and are interested and show up to public hearings, I think keeps the pressure on all of us, and especially on any businesses that utilize our natural resources, to absolutely do the best possible job they can. It's also important to remember that the laws that are put in place have bonding requirements, make sure that money is put up front for any sort of recovery, particularly if those companies find the business models not working and can no longer operate, that we aren't suddenly left with the taxpayers holding the bag. There's money set aside to specifically work on remediation.
One of those mining projects in particular has been kind of a controversial issue, the Back 40 project down in Menominee County. Do you support that project?
I have, yes. It's near where I am. I remember when they were flying over my farm even, they were doing big patterns, crisscrossing, looking for ore bodies with a big radar device under a helicopter. So I'm not that far from it on the Menominee River. I support it. I believe that it can be done. I believe that it's going to be a great asset to the community. I think that the success we've seen up here with the Eagle project is indicative of what can come from utilizing those natural resources in a careful and strategic way.
Is Michigan doing all it can to take advantage of our forest resources?
No, not at all. We can do a lot more. One of the things we could do particularly is certainly leverage our federal officials to work harder on the federal forest issues, because they're just not meeting the amount of wood they should be putting on the market. We need to do some other things. We need to find out why is it that Wisconsin finds it profitable to take the wood all the way from Michigan into Wisconsin. What are they doing differently down there that for that particular, those businesses in Wisconsin can still remain profitable and yet take wood from further away than our local businesses are? What's different in the structuring of their taxes and in their regulations that makes that more viable there? So we need to balance that playing field. There's a lot of different things going on, but I think that there's just so much opportunity at agriculture, where I come from, is another one.
A lot of people may not realize how Michigan is a big player in agriculture and employs a lot of people.
We're the #2 ag diversity state in the country. Only California grows more agricultural commodities than Michigan does. Agricultural economy, depending on how you divide it up, is #2 or #3 in the state when it comes to what it adds to the economy. And it's really a wonderful part of Michigan's heritage and taking care of the environment and being able to drive across our state and see all the farms. And so you come up to the UP and you think, oh, you know, beef, dairy, and a few guys with some cabbage and strawberries or beans, and that's about it. But you go downstate and there's so much more: tomatoes, carrots, geraniums, mint, asparagus, and you could just go on. It's a huge list. And so what can we do? Well, we can do a lot more processing in the state, work on seeing that our products aren't getting exported, but we are doing value added here in the state. The Upper Peninsula still has wonderful farmland for raising cattle in particular, but because of the bovine TB issue downstate, and in my opinion, just the lack of attention that's received, we haven't fixed that problem. Minnesota had TB, they've fixed it. Other states have had it and fixed it. Michigan still lingers. We need a serious plan, an aggressive plan to end this, and to then allow the UP then that market access back to Wisconsin that's really devastated the beef and dairy industries on the western end of the UP and left a lot of that farmland vacant.
Okay, still a lot more questions. We'll get to those
Okay.
in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Our guest this morning is former State Representative Ed McBroom, now running for the 38th Senate seat as a Republican. Let's talk about schools. A lot we can talk about schools, starting with school safety.
Yeah.
This has obviously become a concern in Lansing and in everyone's home
The whole
throughout
country,
UP,
yeah.
throughout the country. What are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, I think, you know, we need to really be very thoughtful and serious in the discussion and think about how, when's the last time a student died in a fire at a school or some of these other emergencies? And yet we still have laws that are so focused on those particular emergencies. What are we doing to help the schools and the students there be relieved from some of that burden and instead focus on this safety issue that really has harmed and seen students and staff pass away
One,
across the
one,
country.
one of the big issues for many schools is the fact that they're really not very secure. They weren't
Exactly.
designed with that in mind, and in some cases it takes a significant, it's not just a matter of buying a new lock for the door.
Right.
You may have to reconfigure the whole building. What about finding funds to do that?
Well, it's one of the things the legislature just has been working on, is appropriating some grants for that. I don't think it's going to be enough. They're going to have to do more. But if you go around to many of the schools, even across the UP, you'll see they're already working on entryway projects to direct traffic flow of visitors to the school, to make sure they're going through the office. They put security cameras in so they can see who's at the door. I mean, there's a lot of those things. One thing that always stands out to me, though, that I think is really important to consider is what kind of police presence and vicinity do they have to the school. And the schools are part of our communities, and our communities and our state, through our tax dollars at both levels, we're paying for police protection. And I'd really like to see us increase the amount of police presence and interaction with the students at the schools that way. But and I think that that's should be a normal part of what we're paying for with our taxes already. But there's, of course, many of our police forces have a lot of demands on them too, and we're seeing them stretch very thin. So supporting them and their work and seeing more officers available, seeing more recruits gotten, especially across the UP, who want to come back and work here in our communities in the UP, is something that we have to do too, that will not just make our schools safer, but our communities in general.
What about financing schools in general? Are we providing enough money, and is it going in the right direction?
Well, I think that it's one of the big problems that we have to consider is that there's not a one-size-fits-all. There's not a one-size dollar amount that's perfect. And what's really frustrating to me is, of course, that schools up here that have enormous districts and bus routes to cover have to take the money out of their per pupil allotment for those things, and another school that has a smaller one, and particularly downstate districts that have none, they get all of that money to spend on something besides transportation. So I think there's a lot of room for some revamping of the formula. I think that we need to consider the issues that when we have declining enrollment, that just because we lost 5 students or 6 students, they were not all in the same grade. So we can't just close a classroom down and let a teacher go. They're stretched across 13 different grade levels. That's not a good way of running the business. So we need to really consider reforming the per pupil idea. We need to allow our school districts to have the ability to make decisions on finances and not be governed by a few students coming in and saying, well, if you get rid of this particular program, I'm leaving, going somewhere else. And then the school says, well, now we have to find a different way to cut budgets and do something else, because the net loss that we experienced for having those students leave to go to the other school takes away the net gain we had in ending a particular program.
We have only a short time left. What about Michigan's road and infrastructure program? Are we on the right track to getting something done there?
Well, you can already see that a significant increase in funding's being given. The change in the fuel taxes a couple of years ago are being implemented through steps over the last couple of years. There's still some ways to go to get to more than $1 billion yearly investment. And you can also see the state, when I was there and even since I've been out, is taking additional revenues each year and putting that into roads and investing an enormous amount more into roads. You're seeing the projects occurring around here. I do think there's significant reforms we could do, though, to make sure more of that money reaches the local level, sees our cities and our county roads, where we really are seeing some of the worst conditions. So there's significant work yet to be done. We really need to reform the way we tax gasoline, because taxes at the pump don't go to roads, not all of them do, and that's wrong and should be fixed.
Do you have a quick final thought on why people should select you in the upcoming election?
Well, I believe that I'm ready for the job, that I've shown that I'm willing to meet with, work with people of all different opinions and work hard for them and work for the Upper Peninsula. And having Tom Casperson's endorsement and carrying on with the good work that's been done, I think are all good reasons why. But if you want a hard-working farmer who works for you, then vote for Ed McBroom.
Our time is up. You've had a chance now to meet Ed McBroom and talk about his candidacy. We'll be back with some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. You know, we spent most of this morning talking about politics, so let's wrap things up with something a little lighter. It starts with a question for you. Do you know the name of the written character that can be substituted for the word and? I'm talking about that single character that's often used in company names like Johnson & Johnson, Barnes & Noble, or AT&T. The question is, do you know what it's called? Not everyone does. It's the ampersand. And its history, including how it came to be called an ampersand, is kind of interesting. To start with, and I did not know this, I actually stumbled across the information one day, the ampersand was once a letter in the alphabet. Actually, it was the 27th letter in the alphabet, so the alphabet used to end with XYZ ampersand, except it didn't have that name back then. Apparently, if we go back to the early 1800s, school children reciting the alphabet would include that 27th character, but saying XYZ and would be confusing. Even more confusing if they would say XYZ and. So they would say XYZ and per se, which means by itself. So over time, as the words and per se were slurred together, it became ampersand. Now at this point, you may be thinking, does he really know what he's talking about? Or is this just something made up to pull the wool over our eyes on a Sunday morning? Well, all I can tell you is this. I found this information on the internet, and we know that's always accurate, he said with tongue-in-cheek. In this case, I do think it's true. Nobody seems to know why the ampersand character was part of the alphabet to start with, or why it was removed. So chances are you can amaze your friends this week by asking them if they knew the alphabet once had 27 letters. And thanks to the Ryan Report, you now have the whole story. You're welcome. I'll be back in a minute. Well, that's our show for this morning. Thanks to Ed McBroom for joining us this morning to talk about his campaign for the 38th State Senate seat. And thank you for joining us. Let's make plans to get together again next Sunday morning.